Well, hey there. You've stumbled upon the intersection of internet quandaries and psychological insight. Welcome to Veritas Views on AITA, where the quirks of the internet meet the expertise of Veritas Psychology Partners.
Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Michael McBride, and today I'm joined by our duo of psychologists.
Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Kessler. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I am pleased to introduce my business partner, Dr. Gayle MacBride. And, we've talked about this before, but Gayle and I went into business together in part because we really like the opportunity to process and work together as a team has always been a strength of our work together before we started Veritas Psychology Partners. And since starting it has really given us the opportunity to sit around and like bounce things off each other. And I think like that ability makes me a better therapist because I get to go, hey, Gayle, like, da, 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 da. And I so value her insights with this. And I'm looking forward to then doing that here, like in our podcast every week. We do this. That's what we do here. So without further blithering on, I'd like to introduce my business partner and good friend, Dr. Gayle MacBride.
Thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. And I agree, it is absolutely one of our strengths. And honestly, it's one of the things that I hold fondest in our relationship as friends and as psychologists, to be able to do this work together and make each other better psychologists. So
great. So Michael, you've got something for us. Michael, bring it on.
Yeah. Well, welcome both of you. For any of the newbies out there, if you don't know what this is, what I've done is I've gone out and I found a scenario online and where somebody has said, this thing happened and I'm wondering who's the asshole and is it me? Am I the asshole?
Probably.
Maybe.
Probably.
Yeah. Probably. Yeah. A lot of times the poster is, but in this case though, we're going to ask that of Dan and Gayle, these two licensed therapists, and see what they have to say. And, where there's been any kind of identifiable information, I've made it a little more discreet. And also, if you're new, stick around through the credits. We always have some kind of bonus conversation. So, but neither Dan nor Gayle have seen this or read it or know what I'm going to throw at them at all. And in fact, this is one that weirdly I've been holding on to for a while. I don't know why. So I feel a little, I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. So today's prompt is, am I the asshole for asking questions during a psychology presentation?
No. That's hilarious. Thank you. But no, I mean,
I would think,
given psychology presentations, I prefer you ask questions.
In fact,
way more interesting.
When Gayle and I recently presented on moral injury, and when we have presented in the past on sleep, like that's part of our like shtick at the beginning. Like if you've got questions, ask. It makes us more interesting when we're answering questions, and it moves the process along. Because if you've got the question, probably someone else does. So we will ask people to ask questions. Now, OP may have been being a dick about the way he asked them, so we're going to hear about that. But what are your thoughts, Gayle?
I totally agree. And in fact, we presented in an online format, and we both were like, shit. Because nobody asks questions in those, and
right.
They talk at the ether, and that's really boring.
It's much more interesting when when we have gotten questions doing an online presentation, like if someone types a question in the chat, it's like, oh great, there's a question, we can answer that, because it gives us a jumping off point that makes it, I think it makes presentations less interesting when someone says, hold all of your questions until the end. Because I kind of like, within reason, like a good presenter is also going to say, I really appreciate all the questions, but I need to have more material to get to, and
Or I'll be answering that in a few minutes. Great question. And you move on. Yeah. I will say I do have a story, and maybe I'll share it at the end, about asking questions. And essentially I was told I was the asshole for asking questions, and I'll tell you more about it, and how I was able to explain my thinking about asking the questions and where I came from. And you can maybe decide if I was an asshole or not. But anyway, let's hear this scenario before we talk about that scenario.
Yeah. So the poster is a early 20s college student. And so his post says, a couple of weeks ago, a psychologist came to give a presentation to our class about how the nervous system works and ways to stay calm during exams. I'm a naturally curious person, so partway through, I asked a question, specifically what the difference is between the sympathetic...
Michael, I'm was this poster named Michael MacBride.
I had the exact same thing. I was going to jump in and literally I had the same.
Naturally curious person I have ever met.
I know. I had the same question. Like, come on, Michael, this is your story. That's from when you were in college and so on. And you're framing it as am I the asshole? So
it was totally a friend of mine. I don't know what you're talking about.
It was a friend.
This is totally you, Michael. Don't make this shit up and say it's someone else. I had the same exact thought, Gail. Totally.
Of course, because we're both about my husband.
Michael, is this really you? Or is this really found on the internet?
I swear it was found on the internet. No, but I feel for this person. Like, I would be absolutely that person, like, ooh, I have this question I need to ask him.
Yeah. Oh, but we know this. All right. Please continue now that we've interrupted you with a flagrant accusation of falsehood.
Okay. So the question was specifically, what's the difference between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems? It wasn't a gotcha question or anything like that, just a question related to what she was already talking about. But instead of answering, she looked visibly uncomfortable and kind of fumbled through the rest of her talk. Afterward, my teacher pulled me aside and was absolutely fuming, saying I embarrassed the speaker and needed to learn when to ask questions so I don't make people uncomfortable. Honestly, I was just baffled. Isn't the point of bringing a guest speaker to engage and learn something? I wasn't trying to be rude. I was literally the only student who cared enough to ask anything. Everyone else was tuned out, and I figured I was doing her a favor by showing interest. Now my class is split. The teacher is mad, and even the parents can't agree on whether I did or said anything wrong. He goes into more detail about how he has other friends in the class, and that's where the parents kind of come in. I didn't think being curious made me an asshole, but now I'm starting to second guess myself. Was I out of line for asking that question?
Well, okay, so that's an interesting AITA here is, am I out of line for asking that question versus am I out of line for asking any questions? I mean, Dan, you and I are both sitting here looking at each other like that is like the least gotcha question. If you were presenting on nervous system response and anxiety management during test taking, if you don't understand the difference between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system functioning, you shouldn't be doing the presentation.
And it's interesting because I frequently talk about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And I had this weird mental block, and you're going to tell me because you're going to remember, but I have this weird mental block. One is excitatory and one is calming.
Right. So
I have talked about
excitatory, right?
Okay. I've been talking about this
for you. So it's excitatory.
30 years.
It's
right. 30 fucking years I've been talking about this.
Sure.
I now am about 60% sure that what you said, like I would have guessed, but I could not and still don't remember well which is excitatory and which is calming.
You know what though? But Dan, I know you well enough in the presentation. If you were the presenter, you'd have been like, that's a great question. And I've been a psychologist for 30 fucking years and I still can't keep the two terms straight. What I can tell you is the differences in the nervous system is one is excitatory and one is calming. And let's not worry about which is which in terms of the naming. If you really want to know, I will make sure to write it down and give you a cue card with it afterwards. Like you would have just owned the ignorance and we would
virtually word for word
presentation. I know because I've worked with you for a long time.
Virtually word for word, what I would say. But what we underscore here is that when you are giving a presentation, sometimes someone's going to ask a question, and in fact, I would say just about every time I give a presentation, someone asks a question that I don't know the answer to.
Oh, that's not what I thought you were going to say.
And the answer is, you know what? I don't know. Let me jot that down, and I will try to get that back to you in whatever forum we're able to do that.
Okay.
But that's the answer because you're not expected as a presenter to know everything, and in fact, acknowledging your ignorance or a hole in your understanding of something. My understanding of the research, and I can't cite anything right now, is that makes people have a greater degree of faith in you. So if you're giving a presentation and you don't know the answer, I'm sorry?
It increases your credibility.
Yes. So, you know what? I don't know. That's the answer. I honestly don't know what that means. I probably should know that if I'm giving this presentation, but I don't.
Okay.
I'll look it up and let you know.
Is what you are probably doing that is different than what this presenter is doing. Let's assume positive intent for a moment. This presenter is in a room full of people and likely has the very natural, very shared, I'll go so far as to call it a fear or anxiety around public speaking, because many of us do. We get that little heart flutter and we get a little nervous, and probably experiencing some sympathetic nervous system overfunctioning and looked wildly uncomfortable. Fight, flight, or freeze, we're not immune to it when we're presenting. And so rather than kind of own being caught off guard or a little anxious about the presentation, attribute it to the student listener and and or didn't do quite enough to soothe and really activate their own parasympathetic nervous system functioning. And just, I'm going to take like a little bit of a side here. Let's worry about the terms less. Let's think about accelerator and brake. And I loved recently, we were talking with another clinician who talked about, very often we present this as an either or. I'm either anxious or relaxed, and you can't do both, as opposed to really thinking about the human system like a finely tuned race car. And when you drive a race car, you two pedal drive, not a regular sedan where you one pedal drive. And so you can stomp on an accelerator, you can hit the brake, and that's going to do something very different. You can kind of skid into a turn.
Wait a second. Hold on.
Hmm.
In a race car, there's a gas pedal and a brake, and you have two pedal drive.
Yeah, race car drivers.
How did they make it? How did they make it to 60 without knowing this?
I don't know.
Okay, no, please.
Anyway, so
I don't
really
know. I'm
not a race car driver.
I am personally appalled by my ignorance on this issue.
And so you use both kind of carefully, right? So you've really got three instruments that you're sitting behind: a steering wheel, a gas pedal, and a brake, and you use those. I think when we talk with our clients, we need to talk about, you're not looking to be in total relaxed state in order to be able to cope. It really is about how hard am I hitting an accelerator? What do I need to do with the brake to stay in control of my vehicle, to keep it on track, as it were? And it doesn't need to be either or. It can be both at the same time. The other thing that I want to say about excitatory sympathetic functioning is we want to think about stress as necessarily a bad thing. And so, gosh, I'm in all of this stress, and look, now I have this sympathetic response and it's very activated. But we forget that excitement, happy stress, looks the same as bad stress. And the nervous system doesn't really know the difference. And so we can label it cognitively as excited or fear, but from a biological standpoint, there's not a lot of difference. It's what our attribution is in our brain. So that is a total aside, because I am geeking out on all of this because I talk about anxiety so much with my clients, and you've heard a big part of my spiel with them now.
No, we both do, like, this idea that's what the really weird part about this is, and we both, like, you called it out immediately, like, if you're a psychologist working with anxiety, this whole idea of sympathetic, parasympathetic is going to come up every single day.
Yeah.
Every day. And you may not use the terms sympathetic and parasympathetic. They're not necessary to use. And I use them sometimes and I don't use them sometimes. And I always cop to not remembering which is which. But the psychologist giving the presentation would be expected to know this. But even if it were a gotcha question, even if it were a question that was not even a gotcha question, a question that was like, if you asked me about other parts of the brain, I mean, I took neuropsychology back in 1994, 3. I'm probably not going to remember it. I'm probably going to say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, and calling out the ignorance of if you're not doing it in a intentionally dickish way. If you get asked a question the person doesn't know or is deeper knowledge base than they have, any good presenter would be like, yeah, I don't know.
Right.
I'm really troubled by this presenter's. I'm troubled by the lack of knowledge that she I forget has.
The presenter was female,
the presenter was female.
I'm troubled by the lack of knowledge that she has on this particular topic, but I'm also, if she doesn't have the knowledge, I'm troubled by her not responding with, I don't know if I can know.
Right. Now, again, assuming positive intent, I'm going to go ahead and assume that she was somewhat nervous in this presentation and came off badly. But as asked, the question is, am I the asshole for asking the question? No, I think you asked a very basic question. And in general, most presenters, not all, but, in my experience recently, probably, I don't know, I'm going to 83% of all statistics are made up on the spot. So, I'm going to say 95% of presenters are really happy to take your question during the presentation, or they will graciously say, that's really interesting, I'm going to get to that in a moment. If you still have questions, raise your hand.
Yeah.
And then you move on, and you don't have to change your spiel or, leave the thread of your speech just to answer a question if it comes up out of left field and you're not ready to do that. There are
Right.
really gracious ways to do that without becoming horrified and then, leading to this other kind of, I'm third minor characters here. I'm annoyed at the teacher for being so annoyed. Like
Right.
the teacher clearly seems to have maybe some sort of buy-in level with the presenter and feels personally responsible to protect this presenter in a way that seems not reasonable. Again, based on scope of knowledge, if I brought this person in and they couldn't answer the question, I'd be disappointed in my choice of presenter. But I might have feelings about that, and it might come out kind of sideways.
But the other piece
Oh.
to that is I've taught college classes and I've had presenters come into classes,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been a presenter in a college class.
Mm-hmm.
I, unless the student was really blatantly being dickish with their questioning, like hammering away or asking unrelated things, or in some way being disparaging of the presenter, I can't think of a time where I'd pull a student aside and say, "You shouldn't have asked that question. You shouldn't have made her feel bad or made her feel like that's." I and I've had times where I'm giving a presentation and people have been very challenging, like really challenging. Like, I know this can't, and I'm like, that's like, as an educator, that's great. Like when students get up enough to really push back on the presentation, to really challenge you, that's what school is all about.
Yeah.
School isn't about someone standing up and telling you what the answers are and you going, okay, thank you, and writing it all down. It's about challenging and questioning. It's about arguing back and saying, well, wait a second, you're making this point, but what about this point? And I think those kinds of discussions are phenomenal.
That's where learning happens.
Yes.
And
Right.
synthesizing that information into what you already know and scaffolding it. And that's all learning theory.
Right. So I far from being upset at a student who's pushing back, like be proud of that student, encourage that student. Like that's again, there are times when people take it too far, but like, no, that's challenge is wonderful.
I'm further disappointed in this teacher, this professor, whatever the role is, because this person should have led with a question instead of an accusation, right? Telling this, and again, as presented.
As presented,
but, is the student is saying, they got kind of chastised for bringing up the question and challenging the presenter, maybe having a discussion and inquiring, hey, I wanted to know a little bit more about where your question came from. It really seemed to catch the presenter off guard. What was your intention? Just fucking ask the question instead of creating an accusation.
I will also say that, like, it is one of the worst things. We talked about this before. When you give a presentation and they're like, no questions, and everyone's sitting there.
Right. I feel like you have not done a good job if someone isn't going to respond to you or not ask questions. You've not inspired anything.
At the end of some of our presentations, Gayle, you and I have talked about this. Like, we got so many questions, so many people were engaged. Like, did you like that person there and that person? Like, so many people ask those questions. Isn't that like we get like that's like if you it is a well-known thing in the presentation world that if you get no questions at all, you have given a shit presentation. For the most part. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but Michael,
I'm kind of jealous when you get held back with her questions, and I'm like, oh, nobody wants to ask me a question. They want to ask me.
You want to get questions.
I want the question.
Yeah, no questions in general, and I could be wrong about this, but I think in the scientific world, if you give a presentation, you get no questions, you've given a shit presentation.
Exactly.
Please, if you have a differing opinion, we'd love to hear from, like, argue back with me about this if you're a listener and want to argue back, but I think, Michael, you've probably given more presentations than I have, but like,
I agree. I mean,
is there data on this somewhere?
I'm sure there probably is, but
you don't have the data readily available.
I started looking for it, and then you asked my name, so it pulled me away from the screen. So, but I'll say, like, yeah, I mean, you feel like you've accomplished something when you have prompted somebody to question something they thought previously, or like you said, to reflect on something that you said and then come back with a follow-up, even if it's hey, did you consider that? One of my very favorite ones, slight derail, was I was doing a presentation at the San Diego Comic-Con, and I got a very serious question from somebody dressed as a cat, which was just fantastic. Like, just love that. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, you want those questions because as a presenter, the hope is there's also an opportunity for you to learn something and make a stronger presentation next time. So
yeah,
but
I think we're in a pretty firm agreement that OP as written is absolutely not the asshole.
Yeah.
Anyone who is debating this or discussing this in any way, again, unless there's something totally different that we understand, no. Like the teacher may have been an asshole. I don't know about. I like hesitate to say asshole, but like as a teacher, pulling someone aside and denigrating them for having a question or being curious to a presenter, that's out of line. At the very least, it's out of line. I don't know if it's being an asshole. It's out of line.
I think it's out of line. And I fault the speaker with being probably underprepared or ill qualified to actually provide this particular presentation. The teacher, I find even more problematic just for shutting down that curiosity in that way. Again, as presented in the online forum. But the student, again, as presented, I don't have any issues with students. Please ask questions. You have a right to know that your teacher knows the material, can present that material in a usable way, and expect your teachers to continue to learn as well. And if they don't know, that's okay. They have learning to do. No one can know all of the things.
Yeah. What'd the internet say, Michael? We say he's not the asshole, and that the teacher is like out of line. What'd the internet say?
The internet, you know, I think it's one of those cases where sometimes the first person who responds in detail then sways a lot of the internet, because one of the very first posts that was thoughtfully constructed kind of tore the kid apart. And said, like, you were trying to derail this, and they clearly were bringing either experience as a presenter where they felt like that happened to them, or, you know, something else that they had done at some point to bear, because it was well,
the premise of it is inaccurate because, as presented, because the kid says, I asked it germane to what was being presented. It's not a derailment. It's a deepening or a better understanding of.
Yeah, and the responder or the commenter or whatever was saying, like, your timing was bad. You know, you didn't, and I don't know how, because he doesn't actually address when the timing occurred.
That's how you do timing, right? You raise your hand. For those in the listening world, you can't see me. I just raise my hand. Then the presenter gets a chance to create timing. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Michael.
So anyway, that one really seemed to sway the internet. So they pretty decisively said the kid was an asshole for interrupting, for trying to derail it, to find, they described it, and clearly a lot of people didn't understand what these parts of the nervous system were, because they're like, you chose something obscure to ask her about. And, you know, as you guys have said, like, a psychologist who deals with anxiety is going to know these things.
I want to forgive the internet a little bit, because what they obviously don't know that we know is that this is like, to frame this up. This would be like the plumbers coming in and saying, I use a wrench. I used a wrench to open the tap, and someone saying, I'm sorry, what kind of wrench did you use? Like, it's that, like, the plumber, of course, is going to say, oh, I use this, because it is so basic. And this question, while sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system sounds obscure, to a psychologist who's doing work with anxiety, this is like the
like 101 shit.
Absolutely most basic sort of a nervous system thing. So it is, but I want to say this not to denigrate the people who got mad at OP about this, but to say, like, they just don't, because they don't. This is something that the psychologist would absolutely 100% be expected to know if they've worked with anxiety at all, and certainly if they're giving a presentation. Not an obscure question. Sorry to interrupt you there, Mike.
No, that's okay. And hopefully one of the people on the internet who was not saying that it was obscure offered this mnemonic for you. So if you need something to help you remember, they said they think of the
Wait. I've made it to 60 without remembering. Maybe I don't want to remember.
I'm trying to help you. It's good. Maybe
I just don't want to know.
Plug your ears and go la 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 la. I want to.
All right, go ahead and give me the mnemonic.
All right, the mnemonic is sympathetic, is surprise. They both start with S, so you can remember that. and parasympathetic is picnic. Both are restful activities and both begin with P, which I was like, I don't know that quite works, but anyway.
You know what?
Stretch.
It probably, it's a stretch, but it's a weird enough stretch that it probably will stick in my brain forever.
Ooh, I'm going to ask you in like 3 months.
You should, and I'll be like, "Oh, picnic, yeah."
Will
totally.
I be an asshole if I put Dan?
No,
on the
no,
spot?
I that'd be kind of cool. I think you should pull that one out, like at my retirement party years down the road. Like, oh, by the way, Dan, and I'll probably like, oh yeah, because Michael's given a great mnemonic, or
Surprise
the guy on the internet has, yeah.
So then a lot of the people who weighed in on the "you're the asshole" contingent, went in and said like they talked about how they used to ask questions to extend a presenter in the class, so then there was less time for the teacher to teach and
I've done that.
assign assignments. And so they're like, that's what you're doing. That's your motive. Like, they all questioned his motivation for asking the question, which we don't really have an explanation for other than
come on.
I just
But
wanted
even if
to
you're
know.
extending, come on. I will absolutely cop to that.
You know what? It's funny because we did a presentation. We did we record insight into our world. We record more than one podcast frequently on a day. And we did one earlier where we were so worried about, or I was so worried about the internet just being really shitty about something, and they really came through in a positive way. Yeah, this wasn't that.
Yeah.
No. It is interesting. Sometimes they really do come through, and sometimes they just predictably disappoint, and we never know which it is. This is a disappointment.
So the second largest contingent was "you're not the asshole," and that one, it was helpful. A number of people who were presenters answered there, and they said, like, I do professional presentations all the time, and so you got a lot of people like you two, saying essentially, I do this. Questions are part of it. And even the people who said, like, some of them said questions are the worst part for me because I never get, my anxiety gets the best of me, and I think I'm not going to be prepared enough to answer them. But it's part of presentations. Like, the idea is like, curiosity is good. Asking questions is part of the learning process. This is literally a learning classroom. It's not like, that's what you're there for. But yeah, those were the two biggest one. But I was kind of surprised it was so lopsided in the way of "you're the asshole." I mean, one of my most memorable presentations solicited like not violent, but like a loud outburst where they're like, "You're wrong," and I was like, "Shit, I did something. Like, I moved that person," and I felt so good about it. Like, they were kind of sputtering and like trying to find their words.
That's exactly like we sort of revel in those moments when we move someone enough to yes, absolutely. If you feel moved enough to push back and tell me I'm wrong, that's glorious. Let's have a conversation.
Yeah,
For sure.
For sure.
Well, thank you both for another riveting debate and a glimpse into the collective conscience of the internet forums and presentations. Remember, morality is often shades of gray and not just black or white.
Surprise or picnic.
Stick around afterwards for the bonus question. I've got one, I think.
Awesome.
You can follow Dr. Dan Kessler at Dr. Dan Kessler and Dr. Gayle MacBride at Dr. G. MacBride. Oh, and you can find them both at veritaspp.com. Credits. Tickling the Ivories, Matthew Reddington. Art, production, and design, bringing the show together with flair and finesse, Michelle Love. Recording and editing, turning chaos into something worth sharing, Michael MacBride. Intro, outro, I'm Kelly Buttrick, a VO talent who just happens to be Dr. MacBride's cousin. Cats, CJ, Linus, Sadie, and Griffin. Hosting by whomever lost the coin flip. Interruptions by all their children. The content of this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional mental health advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Listening to this podcast does not constitute a therapist-client relationship. If you believe you may be experiencing a mental health issue, please seek the assistance of a qualified mental health professional. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis, you can call or text 988 from anywhere in the U.S. to be connected to Crisis Mental Health Services.
Thanks for listening. As promised, here's that bonus conversation.
All right, Gayle, and I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit to summarize quickly and concisely in the format that we have. What are your, we talk, I love going, oh, this is my favorite piece of literature, or this is one of my favorite research articles. Oh, I love this. Let me tell you, because I get kind of geek out over that. Is there a piece of research that maybe doesn't even apply to your daily work that you just go, this is really cool? Is there something that like you like get stuck on and think this is fun or interesting?
There are probably two. One is the foundational article that we reference about sleep all the time. I'm actually not going to talk about that one. I'm going to talk about an article that I saw. It's probably been 6-7 years ago now, where they did work with couples and tried to figure out whether couples who had been together a long time actually knew what their partner was thinking. And through, we do a lot of couples work, and the longer you're together, the more you're like, oh yeah, I know what my partner is thinking. Da, da, da. And it looks like even after 50 years, you are at about a coin toss of knowing what your partner is thinking. So I make this argument all the time to couples. You might think you know how your spouse is going to respond, and yet they have the ability to surprise you. So we've got some research to say you don't know as much as you think you know.
Oh, I love that.
It's
Michael,
so
you will find that link in the show notes, right?
It's so hard to accept it, though, because even as someone who's been married almost 25 years, I will tell you, I think I know my husband's response. Sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I'm
doubt
not.
I doubt that.
Not often, right?
Would you, Michael, in addition to linking in the show notes, would you send that to me directly too? I want to read that article.
I will. I'm interested in it as well. Yeah, I'll be sure.
All right,
to share it
cool.
with you. So
thank you so much. That's a new one that we've not talked about, Gayle.
No, we haven't.
And I think sometimes my brain is particularly hard to know what I'm thinking. So
I will tell you, like most spouses, here's an example. Most spouses know how their spouse likes to take their coffee, right? If you were to get your lovely bride a cup of coffee, you
100%.
would know how she would want it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And you would
30 weight motor oil, nothing else in it.
And she would say, oh, thank you.
Yes.
My spouse does not take his coffee the same way every time.
Oh, that's his problem.
It is his problem, but it becomes my problem because now I begin to look like an uncaring spouse that doesn't know how her husband takes his coffee. What I can tell you about my husband and his coffee is it depends on his mood. That's what I know.
What's wonderful, it is wonderful. I think that people often look for areas of compatibility in a relationship, but I start my day every morning with a cup of coffee, as does my wife, and it is wonderful that we both take our coffee exactly the same way. It just takes all the thinking out of it.
Yeah,
it's wonderful.
Well, and there's no judgment on my standpoint. If you
when looking for a partner, look for a partner who takes your coffee the same. No, there's no data on that.
No, there isn't. But here, I mean, to Michael's point, if I get it wrong, unless I put sugar in it, we're fine.
Okay.
You'll be like, oh, okay, I'll drink that. Cool. So, like, I never get chastised for doing it wrong. He's not an asshole.
Thank you for teaching me something new. That's a really interesting article, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Cool.
So what you should start doing is every time that you wonder what your wife is thinking, you should flip a coin and see which was right.
Yeah, I think it's a bad idea.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Tune in again next week for a whole nother Am I the Asshole debate.
We love hearing from you, so please review us on Apple, Spotify, or, well, wherever you're listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please review, like, and follow. Also, give it a share. This helps us reach more listeners.